The Angolan War of Independence began as an uprising against forced cotton cultivation, and became a multi-faction struggle for the control of Portugal's overseas province of Angola among three nationalist movements and a separatist movement. The war ended when a leftist military coup in Lisbon in April 1974 overthrew Portugal's Estado Novo regime, and the new regime immediately stopped all military action in the African colonies, declaring its intention to grant them independence without delay. It was a guerrilla war in which the Portuguese armed forces waged a counter-insurgency campaign against armed groups mostly dispersed across sparsely populated areas of the vast Angolan countryside. Many atrocities were committed by all forces involved in the conflict. In Angola, after the Portuguese had stopped the war, an armed conflict broke out among the nationalist movements. This war formally came to an end in January 1975 when the Portuguese government, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, and the National Liberation Front of Angola signed the Alvor Agreement. Historical background of the territory. In 1482, the Kingdom of Portugal's caravels, commanded by navigator Diogo Cao, arrived in the Kingdom of Congo. Other expeditions followed, and close relations were soon established between the two kingdoms. The Portuguese brought firearms, many other technological advances, and a new religion, Christianity. In return, the King of the Congo offered slaves, ivory and minerals. Discoverer Paulo Dias de Novais founded Luanda in 1575 as São Paulo da Assunção de Luanda. Novais occupied a strip of land with 100 families of colonists and 400 soldiers, and established a fortified settlement. The Portuguese crown granted Luanda the status of city in 1605. Several other settlements, forts and ports were founded and maintained by the Portuguese. Benguela, a Portuguese fort from 1587, a town from 1617, was another important early settlement founded and ruled by Portugal. The early period of Portuguese incursion was punctuated by a series of wars, treaties and disputes with local African rulers, particularly Ngarembandi, who resisted Portugal with great determination. The conquest of the territory of contemporary Angola started only in the 19th century and was not concluded before the 1920s. Angola had the status of a Portuguese colony from 1655 until the Assembly of the Republic passed a law giving all Portuguese colonies provincial status on the 11th of June 1951. Civil disobedience. The Portuguese Colonial Act, passed on 13 June 1933, recognized the supremacy of the Portuguese over native people, and, even if the natives could pursue all studies including university, the de facto situation was of clear disadvantage due to deep cultural and social differences between most of the traditional indigenous communities, or tribes, and the ethnic Portuguese who used to live in the littoral of Angola. Viriato da Cruz and others formed the Movement of Young Intellectuals, an organization that promoted Angolan culture. In 1948, nationalists sent a letter to the United Nations calling for Angola to be given protectorate status under UN supervision. In the 1950s, a new wave of Portuguese settlement in all of Portuguese Africa, including the overseas province of Angola, was encouraged by the ruling government of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. A new law passed in the Portuguese Assembleia da República giving all Portuguese colonies provincial status on the 11th of June 1951. By this law, the Portuguese territory of Angola started to be officially called Província de Angola, Province of Angola. In 1953, Angolan separatists founded the Party of the United Struggle for Africans in Angola, the first political party to advocate Angolan independence from Portugal. In 1954, Congolese Angolan nationalists formed the Union of Peoples of Northern Angola, which advocated the independence of the historical Kingdom of Congo, which included other territories outside the Portuguese overseas province of Angola. During 1955, Mario Pinto de Andrade and his brother Joaquim formed the Angolan Communist Party. In December 1956, PLUA merged with the PCA to form the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. The MPLA, led by Da Cruz, Mario Andrade, Elidio Machado, and Lucio Lara, derived support from the Ambunduan in Luanda. 1960s. On 3 January 1961, Angolan peasants in the region of Baixo de Cassange, Malange, boycotted the Cotonang's cotton fields where they worked, demanding better working conditions and higher wages. Cotonang was a company owned by Portuguese, British and German investors. Challenging the authorities, the peasants burned their identification cards and attacked Portuguese traders. This was known as the Baixo de Cassange Revolt. By the 4th of January, the Portuguese military responded to the rebellion by bombing villages in the area, allegedly using napalm, killing between 400 and 7,000 indigenous Africans. On 4 February 50 independentist militants in Luanda stormed a police station and São Paulo prison, killing 7 policemen. 40 of the MPLA attackers were killed, and none of the prisoners were freed. The government held a funeral for the deceased police officers on 5 February, during which the Portuguese citizens committed random acts of violence against the ethnic black majority living in Luanda's slums. Separatist militants attacked a second prison on 10 February and the Portuguese reaction was equally brutal. On 15 March, the Union of Peoples of Angola, under the leadership of Holden Roberto, launched an incursion into Angola from its base in Zaire, leading 4,000 to 5,000 militants. His forces took farms, government outposts, and trading centers, killing officials and civilians. Most of them Ovimbundu, contract workers, from the Central Highlands. The UPA entered northern Angola and proceeded to massacre the civilian population, killing 1,000 whites and 6,000 blacks through cross-border attacks. It was the start of the Portuguese colonial war. The Portuguese regrouped and took control of Pedro Verde, the UPA's last base in northern Angola, on 20 September. In the first year of the war, 20,000 to 30,000 Angolan civilians were killed by Portuguese forces and between 400,000 and 500,000 refugees went to Zaire. UPA militants joined pro-independence refugees and continued to launch attacks from across the border in Zaire, creating more refugees and terror among local communities. A UPA patrol took 21 MPLA militants prisoner and then executed them on 9 October 1961 in the Ferreira incident, sparking further violence between the two groups. The United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 163, calling on Portugal to desist from repressive measures against the Angolan people. Roberto merged the UPA with the Democratic Party of Angola to form the National Liberation Front of Angola in March 1962. A few weeks later he established the Revolutionary Government of Angola in exile on 27 March. Appointing Jonas Savimbi to the position of foreign minister. Roberto established a political alliance with Zairean President Mobutu Sese Seko by divorcing his wife and marrying a woman from Mobutu's wife's village. Roberto visited Israel and received aid from the Israeli government from 1963 to 1969. The MPLA held a party congress in Leopoldville during 1962. Viriato da Cruz, found to be slow, negligent, and adverse to planning, and was replaced by Agostinho Neto. In addition to the change in leadership, the MPLA adopted and reaffirmed its policies for an independent Angola: democracy, multiracialism, non-alignment, nationalization, national liberation of the entire colony, no foreign military bases in Angola, Savimbi left the FNLA in 1964 and founded UNITA in response to Roberto's unwillingness to spread the war outside the traditional Kingdom of Congo. In May 1966, Daniel Chipenda, then a member of MPLA, established the Eastern Front, significantly expanding the MPLA's reach in Angola. When the F collapsed, Chipenda and Neto each blamed the other's factions. UNITA carried out its first attack on 25 December 1966, preventing trains from passing through the Benguela Railway at Teixeira de Souza on the border with Zambia. UNITA derailed the railway twice in 1967, angering the Zambian government, which exported copper through the railway. President Kenneth Kaunda responded by kicking UNITA's 500 fighters out of Zambia. Savimbi moved to Cairo, Egypt, where he lived for a year. He secretly entered Angola through Zambia and worked with the Portuguese military against the MPLA. UNITA had its main base in distant southeastern Angolan provinces, where the Portuguese and FNLA influence were for all practical purposes very low, and where there was no guerrilla war at all. UNITA was from the beginning far better organized and disciplined than either the MPLA or the FNLA. Its fighters also showed a much better understanding of guerrilla operations. They were especially active along the Benguela Railway, repeatedly causing damage to the Portuguese, and to the Republic of Congo and Zambia, both of which used the railway for transportation of their exports to Angolan ports. During the late 1960s, the FNLA and MPLA fought each other as much as they did the Portuguese, with MPLA forces assisting the Portuguese in finding FNLA hideouts. Race and ethnicity in the Portuguese armed forces. From 1900 to the early 1950s, the Portuguese maintained a separate colonial army in their African possessions, consisting mainly of a limited number of Camponeses indigenas. Officers and senior NCOs were seconded from the Metropolitan Army, while junior NCOs were mainly drawn from Portuguese settlers resident in the overseas territories. Black assimilados were in theory also liable to conscription, but in practice only a limited number were called on to serve. With the change in official status of the African territories from colonies to overseas provinces in 1951, the colonial army lost its separate status and was integrated into the regular forces of Portugal itself. The basis of recruitment for the overseas units remained essentially unchanged. According to the Mozambican historian João Paulo Borges Coelho, the Portuguese colonial army was segregated along terms of race and ethnicity. Until 1960, there were three classes of soldiers: commissioned soldiers, overseas soldiers, and native soldiers. These categories were renamed to first, second and third class in 1960, which effectively corresponded to the same classification. Later, although skin color ceased to be an official discrimination, in practice the system changed little, although from the late 1960s onward blacks were admitted as ensigns, the lowest rank in the hierarchy of commissioned officers. Numerically, black soldiers never amounted to more than 41% of the colonial army, rising from just 18% at the outbreak of the war. Coelho noted that perceptions of African soldiers varied a good deal among senior Portuguese commanders during the conflict in Angola, Guinea and Mozambique. General Costa Gomes, perhaps the most successful counterinsurgency commander, sought good relations with local civilians and employed African units within the framework of an organized counterinsurgency plan. General Spinola, by contrast, appealed for a more political and psychosocial use of African soldiers. General Caulza, the most conservative of the three, feared African forces outside his strict control and seems not to have progressed beyond his initial racist perception of the Africans as inferior beings. Native African troops, although widely deployed, were initially employed in subordinate roles as enlisted troops or non-commissioned officers. As the war went on, an increasing number of native Angolans rose to positions of command, though of junior rank. After 500 years of colonial rule, Portugal had failed to produce any native black governors, headmasters, police inspectors, or professors. It had also failed to produce a single commander of senior commissioned rank in the overseas army. Here Portuguese colonial administrators fell victim to the legacy of their own discriminatory and limited policies in education, which largely barred indigenous Angolans from an equal and adequate education until well after the outbreak of the insurgency. By the early 1970s, the Portuguese authorities had fully perceived these flaws as wrong and contrary to their overseas ambitions in Portuguese Africa, and willingly accepted a true colorblindness policy with more spending in education and training opportunities, which started to produce a larger number of black high-rank professionals, including military personnel.